It's not Eternal Darkness, it's not Geist, it's not Bayonetta, it isn't even Devil's Third. The least Nintendo game isn't dark, obscure, lewd, or a critical flop. It was developed by Nintendo for every region with an E rating. It's even a direct sequel. Past the NES years, Nintendo's games are defined more than anything by their intent. Underneath its commitments to widely accessible and family-friendly entertainment is the desire for every game and console to explore a new idea to its fullest extent. Figureheads have publicly expressed hesitance to revisit iconic, beloved franchises lying dormant since the 6th generation because they haven't figured out how to push those series forward creatively. This has historically created issues for the company, both financially and in terms of fan sentiment, but I also think it's one of its greatest strengths. You never really know what Nintendo is going to do next. Its brand and ecosystems are so strong that the company can generally expect to recoup their costs. So it takes risks. A lot of them. They don't always pay off, but for better or worse, the end results are experiences that can't be found anywhere else. Even when it ventures into a new and popular genre, it does so in ways that don't really resemble anything else on the market. It never chases trends. Except for when it does. Because 1080 Avalanche is every early 2000s snowboarding game you've ever played. A cast of characters with distinct ethnicities, personalities, and styles, customizable with unlockable clothing and snowboards. Gameplay that's arcadey, but stylistically grounded in real-world extreme sports. Product placement from relevant real-world brands. An original electronic score that largely plays a supporting role to licensed popular music from pop punk, and alternative rock artists. It even uses the same Finger 11 song as SSX3. 1080 snowboarding may predate the series by 3 years, but there is no denying that SSX, and other games like it, influenced Nintendo's direction heading into the sequel. Naturally then, fans of SSX will feel right at home in Avalanche's primary mode of play, but the game's structure is quite different from its inspirations. Rather than a career mode with bracketed competition and semi-linear progression, Avalanche is instead laid out like an arcade game. Choose a difficulty, and you're given 3 lives, with which to clear a gauntlet of increasingly challenging head-to-head races. It's during this core gameplay that tidbits of Nintendo's methodology peek through the early noughts surface. The gameplay and controls are very simple, and on-screen prompts are given for actions like recovering from a loss of balance. And if that doesn't tip you off, there's no missing the giant Mario ice sculpture, or the unlockable NES controller snowboard, complete with sound effects. There's also a penguin you can ride. Wait, isn't that the dude with the burgers? These are just 2 of the game's unlockables. Most of the others are alternate outfits or normal snowboards, which, while certainly less amusing, are just as welcome. I think the game strikes a good balance between a cool, semi-serious extreme sports aesthetic and that trademark Nintendo kookiness. It's well crafted, and it's certainly not boring. Nintendo were trying to offer a first-party equivalent to Amped, Cool Porters, and SSX, but in their own way. And that makes a lot of sense through the eyes of a Nintendo that hadn't yet given up on competing with Microsoft and Sony. The 1080 series comes from the same era in which Nintendo had commissioned and published their own NBA basketball games. Of course, in both cases, these efforts were ultimately made redundant by much more popular multi-platform offerings, but while 1080 Avalanche might have failed commercially, it's not a bad game. Not at all. In fact, there are a couple of things I think it does better than even the best SSX game, which is the third one. Fight me. Namely, while you don't have to win every race to progress through SSX3, you will have to complete each race 3 times in succession, medaling each time to qualify for the next heat. In 1080, so as long as you win, you only have to do each race once before moving on to a new one. Most players will see more of Avalanche's content in a single play session than if they spent the same amount of time with SSX's career mode. If I've got 20 minutes to kill, I can finish 1 race comp in SSX, or I can clear an entire arcade gauntlet in Avalanche, each of which concludes with something else that SSX just doesn't have. This is the #1 reason why 1080 Avalanche is worth playing. On paper, these are scripted time trials, but what they actually are is rewards. They're hectic and difficult, but those 3 lives you had before? Removed from the equation. You can retry these as many times as it takes to ensure you get that photo finish. You already won the competition. This cinematic spectacle is your prize. And it doesn't just look incredible. 1080's already excellent audio design quite literally peaks right here, where a full-scale collapse sounds the part. However, there are a few very good reasons that SSX was remembered while 1080 wasn't. Chief among them, there just isn't enough of 1080 Avalanche to go around. There are twice as many race courses as in SSX3, but 1080s are half as long, a quarter as complex, and rarely recontextualized. Only a third of these courses are even accessible in multiplayer, and the tertiary stunt and time trial modes only change the gameplay loop for the worse. Not even the titular Avalanche sections are fleshed out. There are only 4, and the last is just a reskin. Frankly, the whole package feels a bit cheap. Contrast that to SSX3 with its free-roam overworld, variety of race modes, full slope time trials,
bespoke stunt courses, challenges, collectibles, character customization, leveling system, dynamic music, DJ system, fleshed out characters, cross-platform connectivity, innumerable shortcuts and secret.
You get the picture. At a then standard $50 price point, 1080 Avalanche was plainly a bad deal. Doubly so when the previous year's SSX Tricky was going for less than $20. The game reviewed well, but simply not well enough. By the time On Tour came out, Nintendo's resignation was all but official. Mario is in SSX4. EA won. 1080 was done. But why? Why did they never try again? Nintendo aren't usually the type to let one failure kill a franchise. If 1-2 Switch of all things got another shot, why didn't 1080? I have a theory, and it has a lot to do with the way Nintendo is organized. When we say a game is developed by Nintendo, all that really means is that it made the game internally rather than acting as a publisher for an external developer. That is an important distinction, but not one that tells the full story. Because Nintendo is not one game studio. It's like 10, in a trench coat, with a bunch of subsidiaries and smaller trench coats littered around the globe. Most of their first-party games come from the Entertainment Planning and Development Division, which is divided into a bunch of studios that actually make the games. EPD3 is Zelda, EPD9 is Mario Kart, so on and so forth. The names and organization of these teams has changed a few times over the years, but this is more or less how the company has operated since the 1980s. Nintendo still has ultimate say at the end of the day, but each team has its own leadership and is, to a degree, trusted to make decisions about the scale and direction of its projects. So, which EPD was responsible for 1080 Avalanche? Oh, none of them. Cool. In the late 90s, it became clear to Nintendo that the taste of Western gamers was diverging from their home market. So in 1998, it founded a new studio called Nintendo Software Technology. Located within Nintendo of America in Washington State, NST began as an exploratory collaboration between Nintendo and the DigiPen Institute of Technology, a private university that worked with Nintendo throughout the 90s to teach students how to make games. Nintendo Software Technology was very closely associated with the university, with much of its staff being made up of the school's professors and recent graduates. Their first projects were adaptations of well-regarded third-party franchises, Capcom's Bionic Commando for the Game Boy Color, and then Namco's Ridge Racer for the N64. In both cases, NST produced well-regarded takes on franchises that had been previously developed by third parties. After some port work and a Pokemon spin-off, Nintendo tasked the team with developing next-generation sequels to Wave Race 64 and 1080 snowboarding. This was to be a unique challenge. Whereas their early projects simply needed to bring the appeal of an existing game to a new platform or context, they now needed to adapt 2 successful first-party titles for brand new hardware. 2001's Wave Race Blue Storm shares many of Avalanche's unusually third-party traits. It could just as easily have been a contender for the least Nintendo game, but its overall aesthetic and tech demo-y presentation kept it in second place. Well, that and the fact that I think it kinda sucks, and I don't want to play enough of it to make a whole video about it. Nevertheless, underneath its impressive water physics and McDonald's sponsorships, Blue Storm feels like a Nintendo 64 game in terms of its content and structure. It has its fans, but compared to games like Splashdown or Jet X2O, it is hard to recommend. What all of that indicates to me is that Nintendo kept these games on a short leash. Avalanche and Blue Storm were by far NST's most ambitious projects to this point. I can see why Papa Nintendo would be a little uneasy about letting such a young studio, one that it couldn't consistently oversee, run wild with what the company considered to be pretty important first-party properties. And from that angle, the particular directions NST went with these games makes a lot more sense. Tech features like real-time water physics are easy to pitch, and to market, especially early in a console's lifecycle, while 1080's Avalanche stages gave the game a shtick, worthy of a subtitle without actually needing to broaden its scope. Just a year after 1080 Avalanche's release, NST went on to make its most beloved mark on Nintendo's history with Mario vs. Donkey Kong, spawning a series that it has largely retained control of through the remake that's currently in development. Otherwise, NST has largely been relegated to development support, port work, and other less glamorous jobs. And while I understand that all of that is still important, I can't help but feel like they have more to offer. I won't lie to you and say that I'd pre-order a new 1080 snowboarding game if it was announced tomorrow, but there is certainly an arcade snowboarding-shaped hole in the market, and the jury's still out on who's best to fill it. People have petitioned to EA for years to bring back SSX. The original creator of SSX is working on a successor, and there are some great prospects in the indie scene. If Nintendo does decide to throw a hat into the ring, I hope it at least lets the team behind Avalanche give it another go. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, supporting on Patreon, or simply sharing it with a friend. All three help more than I can communicate. And while I've got your attention, now's a good time to mention I'm experimenting with 60-second reviews of DS games as YouTube Shorts. The first one is up now, and there will be new ones coming steadily starting later this week, so check that out if you're so inclined. Are you excited for Black Ops 6 Zombies? I know this question is supposed to be tongue-in-cheek, but yes, actually. I don't know what happened, but over the last few months, I've kind of developed interest in giving zombies another try. Coincidentally, I played a couple hours of Black Ops 1 Zombies with my housemates last weekend and had a generally good time. I am still a multiplayer gal at heart, but maybe I was just a bit too harsh. I'm not promising anything, but the Black Ops 3 video that started this whole meme was doing the rounds again last month, and as annoying as the influx of Tasmanian devil-esque screeching over my opinions were, they do have me thinking it could offer a unique perspective if I was to take a critical look at zombies sometime. What's the worst gun you've ever used in a game? This one would take a lot of thought to definitively pick, but whoever decided the default weapon in Halo CE should be the plasma pistol was smoking balls. PlayStation Portable or Nintendo DS? For good games, PSP. For interesting games, DS. Do you have an interest in arcade games? Yes, particularly 90s and 2000s Japanese-made stuff, especially SNK and Sega. Jacksonville has great barcades with a really wide selection. I even got to try Maximum Tune recently. Girls? Girls.